That one helicopter that's actually landing, that was the brief pause that we had, just clearing the airspace and getting that helicopter in. And there, I believe that's Mike the Nest in the yellow piece. So is that Mark? That's Mark in the yellow one today. And off he goes. How about a round of applause? We are flying today at World War II weekend. And another PC-26, just a fine example. And coming up next, the biplane with those yellow wings, a Boeing Stearman. And the silver biplane's actually pretty stomp aircraft, kind of a rare sight to see that joining us today. And then that's followed by a whole series of L-birds. I'm going to have to get them closer to me to find out the makes and models here. Looks like a Piper aircraft taking up in front of me right now. Well, the first one's actually an L5, that's the Stinson going off. Second up is, I'm not sure if that was tailcraft. There's a tailcraft going up right now. That's the L2. Followed by, looks like the Charger. That's going to be the L4. And that looks like what's coming up last here. And another L2. That looks like the tailcraft going off. And our last one, looks like another L3 going up right here with the Great North Africa markings on it. You see that? Beige paint scheme with that blue star and that yellow surround. That's North African paint scheme. I'm going to turn the mic over here to Gary Wolf a little bit, learn a little bit more about these aircraft. While these airplanes are circling around, if you happen to be a first-time visitor here, a little history about the ground you're standing on, which itself was significant during World War II. The Reading Municipal Airport opened for business in 1939, and later on in 1941, TWA was the first airline that had service here. In 1942, the U.S. Army expanded the airfield, and in 43 it was commissioned the Reading Army Airfield. 2 fighter squadrons are based at the west ramp over by the aerodynamics hangar, which you can see if you look slightly over to your right. The area here at the north ramp where we're all standing was used primarily for bombers and transports. The east end of the field, behind the home front T hangars, over by the radar tower, was a prisoner of war compound. At one time, there were as many as 350 German POWs housed there. Many of the local residents spoke German, so communication with the POWs was not an issue. In fact, the POWs were put to work harvesting grains and fruits for the local farmers. They also worked the motor pool at the Reading Fairgrounds. The area you're standing on itself is where the B-24 bombers were prepared for combat. After they came off the assembly line at Ford's Willow Run plant in Michigan, they were flown here to have weapons installed, as well as the Norden bomb site. After the war, the Army decommissioned the Reading Army Airfield and gave it back to the city of Reading at the end of 1946. Then in 1949, the airport was renamed Spots Field in honor of Boyertown native Carl Spots. A great deal. It's got 2 levels of flying going right now. You notice those primary trainers, those Fairchild aircraft, just a little bit higher than the L-birds. Gives us a nice view here. Those primary trainers for the Fairchild, when we talk about primary trainer, that means this is the first kind of aircraft that an air cadet would fly in when they were trying to get their wings in the military. A lot of times these Fairchild aircraft are actually flown by civilian contractors, something known as the CPT, civilian pilot training, and your job is to be able to pass this early flight stage in order to get your wings and actually be accepted into the military. Same thing with that Boeing Stearman above our heads, giving us a nice view with a little bit of smoke on, kind of dressing the sky up for us. Drop your eyes down below a little bit and you see this parade, great parade of L-birds.
The L-birds stand for liaisons. They really did a little bit of anything and everything during World War II. The work that they did during the war actually ended up being quite groundbreaking. And a couple of guys that built these airplanes, one named William Piper, another guy named Charles or C.G. Taylor. These guys had the idea of these little airplanes, using them for all kinds of techniques during the war. Now remember, before the war, these small airplanes were just sport planes. It took the vision of men like Taylor and Piper to come up with all of the tremendous ideas that these airplanes could produce during the war. Number one, they could be used for artillery spotting. This is the kind of airplane that would fly out over enemy territory to be able to spot for enemy positions in order to position our artillery to actually fire at just the right place where that enemy was lying. That meant that you were an unarmed pilot in a small, slow-flying airplane. You had to go over enemy territory, lots of people, lots of weapons, try to find them, try to spot them. Usually artillery rounds would be firing in on those troops. This airplane's over enemy lines and somebody's saying, well, you need to bring it in 5 kilometers to the south, 3 kilometers to the left, something like that in order to get that artillery spot on. It was fairly dangerous work that these men did, these L-birds, and they certainly didn't achieve the glory or the recognition that many of the other pilots did during the war. Now you see a lot more manufacturers that made these, because most of the aircraft, the L-birds, are made by factories that are not producing huge amounts of airplanes. So instead of one manufacturer coming up with thousands of these things, you actually have many manufacturers making them in the hundreds or even in the short number of thousands. Things like Piper, Taylor, Interstate was a number that did that. Also Aranca out in Ohio was a factory that produced these L-birds. A number of different manufacturers are making all this into a reality. The L-bird's actually also one of the first airplanes used as an air ambulance. If you ever get up close to one, you can notice that you can kind of lay a person in the back of an L-bird. If you see how that fuselage is laid out, there's room to put a litter. There's room to put a person in a stretcher on the back of that aircraft, and they actually did that during the Second World War. These aircraft can land in very soft fields in very short amount of space, and that meant that they could get to forward areas, places that larger airplanes could not accommodate and help troops. These airplanes could actually go in. This is really the beginning also of air evacuation. And you see them doing some nice photo passes for you. Even some dips in the wings, turns to the right, turns to the left, trying to give us the best view that we can. I see the little Piper Cub, that's the L4 above our heads here. Now, when you see those stripes on an aircraft, see that aircraft with the black and white stripes on it, you see those on a number of airplanes here on the field. That was known as the D-Day markings. That was actually for the invasion of Normandy. All those thousands of airplanes in the air at one time, it was decided that the Allied aircraft needed a distinctive marking on those wings to make sure that those aircraft were easily identifiable to try to avoid the terrible tragedy of friendly fire. So these black and white stripes, very bold, very pronounced, were painted on these aircraft. If you walk down to the ramp and see the great C-47 down there, you'll notice that aircraft is also painted in the D-Day stripes. And high above, we saw the steerman making a pass. Here comes that French Storch biplane. That's actually a nice rare sight. It's like a nice place to be in a biplane today. And from the left to the right, here comes that other PT-26, that German Fairchild design. Actually, Fairchild himself didn't really design this airplane. Fairchild was a tremendously successful manufacturer right down in Hagerstown, Maryland. But Fairchild himself was actually never a pilot, nor was he ever an engineer. He was just a brilliant businessman, a brilliant entrepreneur. That was actually designed, the PT-26, by a guy named Armand Thibault, a famous designer because he went on to design the military's first cargo aircraft, at least an airplane designed expressively to carry cargo. something known as the C-82. And we've got some low runs here. You see these aircraft on final. We're going to begin to recover the L-birds now. So it's kind of a nice view to watch them make that turn and be able to pull in on that landing. We'll use a number of terms today when we're talking about the aircraft coming and going. I might talk about asking you to look for an airplane on the downwind leg. And if you look just above the control tower at the airfield, you see an aircraft. I think that's that Piper L4. He's flying right now the downwind leg. That's that leg opposite of the runway, hence downwind, because that wind is at your back. Now, if you follow that airplane in, we can describe what he's going to be doing in order to get himself back onto the runway. Right now, you see him making that left turn. He is doing what's called turning base. So if we're using that phrase today, talking about an aircraft on base or turning base, that's right where that aircraft is going to be. Picture drawing that rectangle. One of those sides of the rectangle is the runway. The other side of that rectangle is the downwind leg. Now once he clears that base leg, he's going to straighten those wings. The trick is to get that nose lined up right with the center line of the runway, and that's called being on final. Right now he's actually what we would call short final. So if we're calling short final today, look close to the runway. If we're calling long final or just final, keep your eyes up towards that ridge. They're probably making a slightly longer line into that runway. If you ever get a chance to walk up to the L-birds, it's kind of interesting to notice just how light these airplanes are. Most of these times you're talking about aircraft that don't even weigh 3,000 pounds with pilot and fuel. Very small, and you'll also notice